September 15th, 1940. In the dimly lit halls of the Prime Minister's official residence in Tokyo, cigarette smoke hung thick, curling in slow spirals as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stubbed out his third lucky strike of the meeting. The American tobacco, a subtle irony, was not lost on anyone present. Prime Minister Prince Fumimaro Konoe cut through the ceremonial formalities, asking the question that hung over Japan like a storm cloud. If we go to war with America, what are our chances? Yamamoto's answer, measured yet foreboding, would echo through the corridors of the Japanese Empire until its final days. If I am told to fight, regardless of consequences, I shall run wild for the first 6 months or a year, he said, his voice calm, almost clinical. But I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year. The room stiffened. Here stood the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, the man tasked with leading any war against the United States, essentially predicting Japan's defeat before a single shot had been fired. His peers shifted uneasily. Yamamoto's words were not speculation. They were a conclusion drawn from years of meticulous observation, experience, and calculation. He had walked the factories of America, traced the veins of its oil fields, calculated production capabilities down to the last rivet. He had studied the mathematics of destruction in lecture halls at Harvard, verified it in steel mills across Pennsylvania, and confirmed it among the endless oil derricks of Texas. Yamamoto understood a truth that most of his contemporaries refused to see. Japan had already lost any protracted war with America before it began. The only question was time, 6 months of tactical victories before the industrial colossus fully awakened. Born on April 4, 1884, in Niigata Prefecture, Yamamoto's origins were humble. He was the 6th son of a struggling schoolteacher, and his father's advanced age at his birth lent him the name Isoroku, meaning 56. Childhood was a daily struggle against poverty. Meals of sweet potatoes and barley were often the family's only sustenance. These early hardships gave Yamamoto a unique lens through which he would later perceive the staggering abundance of the United States. By 1916, he was adopted by the Yamamoto family, a common practice for social advancement in Japan. By then, he had already lost 2 fingers on his left hand at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, where Japan had achieved a stunning victory over Russia. That triumph had fostered a dangerous belief among the Japanese elite that spiritual courage could overcome material limitations. Yamamoto, however, knew otherwise. Tsushima had been won not through mystical superiority, but through circumstance. Russia's power had been stretched across thousands of miles battling revolution at home. America, he realized, would present no such vulnerabilities. To truly grasp the American behemoth, Yamamoto knew he had to experience it firsthand. In 1919, at 35 years old, he received orders that would change the course of history. A posting to Harvard University, ostensibly to study English and observe naval developments. This journey transformed a proud Japanese officer into a Cassandra figure, a prophet of doom few would heed. April 1919 found Yamamoto at Harvard, wearing his naval uniform and carrying 2 swords, a striking figure amid ivy-clad buildings. His grades were unremarkable, a C+ in English, but the true education was unfolding beyond the classroom. Living modestly in Massachusetts, he adopted a rigorous routine, sleeping only 3 to 4 hours per night, and dedicating the rest of his time to understanding the backbone of American power, industry, oil, and aviation. His quarters overflowed with maps of oil fields, technical journals, and statistical abstracts. While other Japanese students attended classes, Yamamoto traversed the libraries and streets of America, absorbing data on production efficiency and resource abundance. He discovered that in 1919, the United States produced 65% of the world's oil, 378 million barrels, while Japan relied entirely on imports, mostly from America itself. Summer excursions became his clandestine laboratories. He hitchhiked across Texas, observing oil extraction and refinery operations firsthand. In Detroit, he marveled at the Ford Highland Park plant, where Model Ts rolled off the assembly line every 45 seconds. Each worker, a specialist performing repetitive, precise tasks, contributed to a production system so efficient that Ford alone employed more industrial workers than the entire Japanese Navy. The raw numbers astonished him, but the implications were even graver. These assembly lines could, with minor adjustments, produce military vehicles, tanks, and aircraft engines. Yamamoto's travels revealed more than statistics. They revealed the cultural pulse of American innovation, risk-taking, and industrial audacity. He recorded in meticulous notebooks every observation, every calculation, understanding that the industrial might of a nation, more than its battlefield heroics, would determine the fate of wars yet to come. By the end of his Harvard years, Yamamoto had seen enough to comprehend a stark reality. Japan was a small island nation dependent on imported resources. Facing a continental colossus capable of producing, innovating, and mobilizing at a scale unimaginable in Tokyo or Yokohama. His warnings, rooted in fact and first-hand observation, would eventually be dismissed, but the truth he had witnessed would haunt Japan's military strategies for the next 2 decades. By the summer of 1919, Yamamoto's immersion in American industry had reached a fever pitch. Harvard had given him language skills, but the real lessons were learned on the road, in the factories, refineries, and shipyards that powered the United States' rising global influence. He traveled extensively, from the steel mills of Pittsburgh to the oil fields of Oklahoma and Texas. In Tulsa, the oil capital of the world, he observed the black rivers of crude pumping ceaselessly from the ground, flaring in giant torches that painted the night sky orange. Each barrel represented not just fuel, but potential firepower, ships, tanks, airplanes. He noted the speed of extraction, the sheer volume, and the American ability to mobilize capital, labor, and technology with unmatched precision. Detroit became his second classroom. The Ford Motor Company's Highland Park plant seemed almost alive, a mechanical organism with thousands of workers performing a single repetitive task each, yet together creating a symphony of productivity. He calculated that, with minor modifications, this facility could produce military vehicles on a scale that Japan could only dream of. The realization settled heavily on him. A long war with America would be unwinnable. Numbers did not lie. Yet Yamamoto was not just analyzing machines. He was observing the spirit of the people. In small towns and bustling cities alike, he saw a culture of experimentation, efficiency, and relentless ambition. Every assembly line, every refinery, every railroad yard revealed not just industrial might, but a mindset that fueled it. Americans thought in systems, in speed, in scale. Courage and honor alone would not match such a force. He meticulously documented these findings in his journals, a mix of statistics, sketches, and reflections. Oil production figures, workforce efficiency, and industrial capacity were paired with somber commentary. Japan cannot sustain a prolonged conflict with the United States. Our victories will be brief. The industrial leviathan cannot be defeated with courage alone. Despite these insights, Yamamoto's warnings were often met with disbelief back home. The Japanese military culture prized bravery, loyalty, and honor above pragmatism. To predict failure before engaging in battle was considered unpatriotic, even cowardly. Yet Yamamoto, ever disciplined and rational, persisted. He knew the stakes. He knew that understanding the enemy's strength was not defeatism, it was strategy. By 1921, he had returned to Japan, carrying more than knowledge. He carried a prophecy. The empire's leaders would hear only what they wanted: the thrill of expansion, the pride of past victories, the allure of empire. But Yamamoto saw what lay beneath the surface: an industrial giant, a nation with limitless resources waiting quietly across the Pacific. In the years that followed, he rose through the naval ranks, eventually becoming commander-in-chief of the combined fleet. Behind his polite smile and courteous manner lay a mind constantly calculating, anticipating, and strategizing. Every decision was tempered by what he had seen in America: the factories, the oil fields, the assembly lines, the indomitable spirit of a people who could outproduce and outlast Japan in any prolonged conflict. When the day finally came in 1940, as Japan debated war with America, Yamamoto spoke with the authority of someone who had walked among the industrial heart of the enemy. If we are forced into war, we may achieve initial victories. But the longer the war drags on, the more certain our defeat becomes. Few listened. History would prove him right. By the late 1930s, the clouds of war were gathering over the Pacific. Japan, driven by a hunger for resources and strategic dominance, eyed Southeast Asia with increasing aggression. Yamamoto, now a seasoned admiral, understood the stakes more clearly than most of his peers. The Imperial Navy was powerful, yes, but compared to the United States, it was still a fledgling flame against a roaring inferno. Despite his reservations, Yamamoto was tasked with planning an operation that could cripple the American Pacific Fleet and give Japan the breathing room it desperately needed: a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. He approached the plan with meticulous precision. Every detail mattered: the timing of the carriers, the altitude of the dive bombers, the approach vector across the Pacific, the fuel calculations, the risk of early detection. He knew that a perfect strike could stun America, possibly buying Japan months, maybe a year of strategic advantage. But he also knew the harsh truth: this was a temporary measure. The industrial might of the United States could replace losses far faster than Japan could sustain them. In private, he often spoke of the paradox: "I fear all we have built will vanish in the long struggle. Victory will taste sweet, but the price is certain. We cannot win a war of attrition with America. It is not a question of courage. It is arithmetic." Still, duty bound him. Honor, discipline, and loyalty to the emperor dictated that he execute the mission with excellence, no matter his personal misgivings. The Japanese leadership, intoxicated by nationalism and confidence, embraced his plan enthusiastically, seeing only the prospect of a stunning victory. Yamamoto's warnings, logical and unyielding, were mostly ignored. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the first wave of Japanese aircraft tore across the Hawaiian skies. Sailors and Marines on the decks of battleships had no warning until bombs and torpedoes rained down. Yamamoto watched the reports come in with the detached precision of a strategist: damage assessments, ship counts, aircraft losses. The operation was a tactical masterpiece. For a moment, it seemed as if Japan's bold gamble had paid off. Yet beneath the surface of triumph, Yamamoto's predictions whispered relentlessly. The Americans, stunned but unbroken, would rebuild with unimaginable speed. Factories would churn out ships, planes, and munitions at rates that Japan could never match. The initial victories were a fleeting illusion, a brilliant strike illuminating the inevitability of long-term defeat. This duality haunted him. He had orchestrated one of the most audacious attacks in history, yet in his heart, he carried the knowledge of its ultimate futility. To the world, he was a hero; to himself, a man who had glimpsed the unavoidable tide of history and knew that it could not be turned. Yamamoto's genius lay not in denial, but in honesty. He saw clearly, measured carefully, and acted decisively, even when the decisions he made were shadowed by impending disaster. His life and career became a study in the tension between immediate tactical brilliance and strategic inevitability. The months after Pearl Harbor were a whirlwind of victories and expansions for Japan. Wake Island fell, the Philippines were overrun, Hong Kong and Malaya succumbed with surprising swiftness. Japanese forces seemed unstoppable, and the empire's reach extended across the Pacific like wildfire. Yet Yamamoto saw the cracks beneath the triumph. The victories, brilliant though they were, masked a harsh reality. Japan's resources were finite, its industrial base limited, and its population stretched thin. Each new conquest demanded men, fuel, ammunition, and time. Commodities America could produce far faster than Japan ever could. He warned his superiors, "I fear we have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve." His words, now famous, were more than prophecy. They were a measured assessment of the arithmetic of war. While tactically brilliant, Japan's strikes had not eliminated the American fleet entirely. Crucial carriers had survived, and the industrial heart of the United States remained untouched. Yamamoto understood that even a flawless tactical victory could never substitute for strategic sustainability. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 became the crucible of his fears. Intelligence breakthroughs allowed the Americans to anticipate Japanese movements. Yamamoto's carefully laid plans collided with a foe who had learned, adapted, and struck decisively. Within minutes, the tide of the Pacific shifted. 4 Japanese carriers, the core of the fleet that had carried out Pearl Harbor, were lost. Thousands of men, planes, and years of preparation vanished in a matter of hours. Yamamoto, ever the strategist, was devastated, but not broken. He recognized that the war had entered a new phase, one where bold maneuvers alone could no longer guarantee success. The operational brilliance that had defined the early months of expansion now had to contend with attrition, industrial imbalance, and an enemy whose potential seemed limitless. Despite the setbacks, he continued to command with clarity and discipline, orchestrating fleet movements, supply lines, and defensive strategies across the vast Pacific theater. He understood that the war had become a test not of courage alone, but of endurance, planning, and the cruel arithmetic of resources versus ambition. In quiet moments, he reflected on the irony. His greatest tactical triumph had also sown the seeds of strategic disaster. Pearl Harbor had shocked the world, but it had also awakened an industrial colossus that would reshape the Pacific forever. Yamamoto's genius lay not in avoiding conflict, but in seeing it with unflinching clarity, understanding the inevitable consequences that others refused to face. After Midway, the Japanese Empire was forced onto the defensive, retreating from positions once seized with ease. The Pacific, vast and merciless, became a chessboard where Yamamoto tried to anticipate every American move. He reorganized fleets, strengthened island garrisons, and coordinated supply lines, all while knowing the odds had shifted irreversibly against him. Despite dwindling resources, Yamamoto continued to plan offensives, believing that calculated strikes could slow the Allied advance. The Solomon Islands became a bitter theater of attrition. At Guadalcanal, Japanese forces fought with unmatched courage, yet the American industrial machine and persistent air and naval support proved relentless. Every gain cost men and material that could never be replenished at the pace of American production. Yamamoto was acutely aware of the strategic impossibility of Japan's situation. He cautioned his superiors repeatedly, advocating for measured defensive strategies rather than reckless offensives. Yet the political and military leadership demanded bold action, still clinging to the hope of turning the tide through daring maneuvers. Even as he planned the next operations, intelligence reports painted an ominous picture. The United States had cracked Japanese codes, tracking fleet movements with deadly precision. The hunter had become the hunted. Yamamoto's own operational brilliance was now vulnerable to the very ingenuity he respected in his adversary. In April 1943, his fate was sealed. American intelligence, acting on decrypted communications, orchestrated a precise ambush. Yamamoto's plane, traveling over the Solomon Islands on an inspection tour, was intercepted by P-38 Lightning fighters. The air exploded in seconds. The admiral, architect of Japan's early victories, was killed instantly. The loss reverberated through Japan. He was a commander, strategist, and symbol of naval ingenuity, now removed from the battlefield. Yet even in death, Yamamoto's prescience remained haunting. He had foreseen the awakening of a sleeping giant. had understood the limits of ambition against industrial reality and had known that brilliance alone could not compensate for imbalance in resources and logistics. For the Allies, Yamamoto's death was a symbolic victory, but for history, it was a reminder of the tragic weight of genius constrained by circumstance. The war he had unleashed continued, as relentless and unforgiving as the ocean he had once sought to command. Yamamoto's death left a gaping void in Japanese strategic command. Admiral Minoru Koga and other successors lacked not only his operational brilliance, but also the deep understanding of American capabilities that had guided every calculation Yamamoto had made. Japan's military continued to fight with courage and discipline, but each battle was now a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The Allied forces, empowered by intelligence breakthroughs and a vast industrial base, began to exploit weaknesses that Yamamoto had long anticipated. At each turn, the Pacific became a testing ground where Japanese ingenuity clashed with American resources. The Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and the Central Pacific were scenes of grueling campaigns marked by attrition, isolation, and logistical nightmares for Japan. Yamamoto's warnings about the unsustainable nature of Japan's position were proving tragically accurate. American mass production became the decisive factor. Aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers flowed from shipyards in numbers Japan could never match. Bombers, fighter planes, and transport aircraft replaced losses in weeks, whereas Japan struggled to maintain even a fraction of their strength. The industrial equation Yamamoto had calculated years earlier at Harvard unfolded with chilling precision. Oil shortages compounded Japan's troubles. Even with the capture of the Dutch East Indies, the quantity of fuel was insufficient to sustain operations. Submarine attacks and air raids further strangled supply lines. Yamamoto had predicted this outcome. Japan's strategy depended on temporary victories, but the enemy's production capacity would inevitably overwhelm any territorial gains. Japanese pilots and sailors fought with determination, but experience and training could not offset material disadvantage. Veteran aviators were lost in battles such as the Solomon Islands campaign and the Coral Sea, and replacements, inadequately trained, could not match the skill of American forces. The tragedy Yamamoto had foreseen, the combination of courage and inevitability, played out in full. Civilian morale also began to waver. Cities endured air raids, blockades cut off essential resources, and the promise of early victories gave way to the stark reality of attrition and retreat. Yamamoto's insight into the psychological dimensions of warfare proved prescient. Japan's society, like its military, could endure only so long against the grinding weight of industrial and technological superiority. By mid-1943, the Pacific War had transformed from a campaign of expansion into a struggle for survival. Each Japanese offensive was met with overwhelming American firepower, precise intelligence, and relentless production. Yamamoto's early calculations that Japan could run wild for 6 months but face inevitable defeat thereafter were now confirmed with mathematical clarity. Even in defeat, his strategic logic remained evident. Japanese forces continued to inflict tactical damage, delay advances, and demonstrate remarkable adaptability. Yet the broader trajectory of the war was beyond recovery. The balance of resources, technology, and industrial capacity that Yamamoto had studied and predicted now defined the conflict's outcome. By late 1943, Japan's strategic position had become increasingly desperate. Each counteroffensive was meticulously planned, yet doomed by the stark realities Yamamoto had predicted. At places like Tarawa, Bougainville, and New Guinea, Japanese defenders displayed extraordinary courage, often fighting to the last man. Yet their bravery could not compensate for dwindling resources, inadequate supplies, and the overwhelming production capacity of the United States. The Solomon Islands campaign revealed the brutal arithmetic of modern war. Japanese forces, often isolated on small islands, endured relentless bombardment from naval gunfire and aerial attacks. Their supply lines, already overstretched, were systematically targeted by submarines and carrier-based strikes. Yamamoto's foresight about Japan's dependence on secure supply chains had proven tragically accurate. Meanwhile, American forces grew increasingly confident. Superior logistics allowed for continuous rotation of troops, replacement of lost equipment, and coordination across multiple theaters. Every battle, whether in the Coral Sea or the Central Pacific, became an exercise in applying overwhelming industrial and technological weight against skillful but materially exhausted defenders. Japan attempted to innovate, deploying new aircraft, kamikaze tactics, and fortified defensive positions. Yet each measure was a temporary solution, a local adaptation in the face of an insurmountable strategic disadvantage. Yamamoto had long understood that Japan could achieve tactical victories, but sustaining a long-term war against a nation capable of mass production and rapid adaptation was beyond reach. Attrition became the defining feature of Japan's defensive campaign. Experienced pilots and sailors were lost faster than they could be replaced, and training standards declined sharply. Land battles were fought with ferocity, yet the lack of artillery, armor, and ammunition increasingly determined outcomes before tactics could. Yamamoto's early warnings about the unsustainable cost of prolonged conflict had become reality. By 1944, the Allies had shifted to a strategy of island hopping, bypassing heavily defended positions to isolate Japanese garrisons. Each skipped island became a death trap, cutting off supplies and leaving soldiers stranded. Yamamoto had envisioned the possibility of such attritional warfare, understanding that Japan lacked the strategic depth to counter a sustained multi-theater offensive supported by vast resources. Despite the setbacks, Japanese society and military continued to exhibit remarkable resilience. Civilians endured shortages and air raids, while soldiers fought with unwavering determination. Yet even the most heroic actions could not alter the fundamental equation. Industrial capacity, technological superiority, and secure supply lines had become decisive factors. As 1944 progressed, the gap between Japanese courage and Allied power widened. Yamamoto's calculations, once theoretical exercises in strategy, now dictated the reality on the battlefield. Japan's victories were tactical and fleeting, its defeats inevitable and strategic. By 1944, the tide of war in the Pacific had fully turned. The Allies, armed with industrial might and superior intelligence, advanced steadily through the island chains, employing a strategy that minimized risk while maximizing attritional damage to Japanese forces. The capture of Saipan and the Mariana Islands brought American bombers within striking distance of the Japanese home islands, a strategic reality Yamamoto had long feared. Japan's air defenses were overstretched and undertrained. Experienced pilots, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, had been decimated in previous battles, leaving new recruits ill-prepared for the relentless air raids now raining down from the sky. Cities like Tokyo, Kobe, and Osaka faced sustained bombardments that reduced residential areas and industrial centers to ashes. Yamamoto had envisioned the destructive power of modern air warfare, but even he could not have fully imagined the scale of devastation that awaited his homeland. The naval war mirrored the aerial struggle. Japanese fleets, once dominant, were systematically destroyed or neutralized in decisive battles such as Leyte Gulf. The combined effects of submarine attacks, carrier strikes, and logistical attrition left the Imperial Navy fragmented and impotent. Yamamoto's earlier warnings about Japan's vulnerability to protracted, multi-front conflict were now borne out in devastating clarity. On land, Japanese soldiers fought with desperate valor, often engaging in last-stand defenses on isolated islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The civilian population, increasingly mobilized for defense, endured shortages, forced labor, and air raids, embodying the extreme human cost of total war. Even as soldiers and civilians alike displayed extraordinary courage, The imbalance in resources and firepower made victory impossible. By mid-1945, the strategic bombing campaign reached its peak. Firebombing raids annihilated Tokyo in March, and later, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the catastrophic consequences of modern industrialized warfare to a terrifying climax. Yamamoto's strategic insight that Japan lacked the industrial depth to sustain a drawn-out conflict against the United States was now a harsh reality. Tactical skill and bravery could no longer offset overwhelming material disadvantage. Faced with annihilation, Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The war had exposed the limits of valor against industrial might and technological supremacy. Yamamoto's foresight, once criticized by some as defeatist, had accurately predicted the trajectory of the conflict. Japan could fight skillfully, but the nation could not win a war it lacked the economic and logistical foundations to sustain. The Pacific War ended not solely through battles, but through the relentless calculus of industrial power, strategic planning, and attrition, an unyielding testament to the reality Yamamoto had long understood. The courage of Japan's soldiers and civilians, though heroic, could not rewrite the fundamental laws of modern warfare. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's radio announcement marked the end of hostilities. Japan had surrendered unconditionally, bringing the Pacific War to a close. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead or displaced, and the industrial and military infrastructure that had once powered imperial ambitions was shattered. For the Japanese people, surrender was not merely a political event. It was a profound shock to a society built on honor, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to the emperor. The strategic and tactical lessons of the war became painfully clear. Yamamoto's predictions had been tragically accurate. Japan's industrial base could not match the capacity of the United States, and no amount of battlefield heroism could compensate for material and logistical inferiority. The war had revealed that in the modern era, victory relied not solely on courage or tactical brilliance, but on industrial power, technology, and strategic foresight. In the years following the surrender, Yamamoto's legacy was reassessed. Critics and historians alike recognized the prescience of his warnings before Pearl Harbor, that Japan could ignite a war with the United States, but could not win a protracted conflict against a nation of immense industrial and technological might. His reputation evolved from that of a controversial strategist to a symbol of insight and realism in the face of national ambition. The human cost of the war lingered. Millions of Japanese civilians, soldiers, and prisoners of war endured suffering long after hostilities ended. Cities were rebuilt slowly, economies restructured, and the nation confronted the consequences of imperial overreach. Globally, the war reshaped power dynamics, accelerating the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers and heralding the dawn of the nuclear age. Yamamoto's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the limits of military skill against overwhelming material and strategic forces. His vision reminds us that in modern warfare, foresight, preparation, and an honest assessment of one's capabilities are as crucial as courage and loyalty. The war he fought and foresaw remains a powerful study in the balance between ambition and reality. The Pacific War demonstrated a paradigm shift in the nature of conflict. No longer could naval skill, bravery, or tactical ingenuity alone determine the outcome. Industrial capacity, technological innovation, and logistical mastery had become decisive. Yamamoto had understood this decades before the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. He had seen America's assembly lines, oil fields, and supply chains, calculating the mathematics of war with meticulous precision. The lesson was simple, yet brutal. Courage alone cannot sustain a war against a nation that can replace its losses faster than you can inflict them. Modern military strategists still study Yamamoto's insights. His observations highlighted the critical interplay between strategy and economics. While battleships, aircraft, and trained pilots are vital, the engines of war are factories, fuel, and raw materials. Japan's rapid early victories, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies, were impressive, but ultimately ephemeral, like a candle flickering against a rising storm. The empire had underestimated the depth and resilience of American industrial power, something Yamamoto had predicted with chilling accuracy. Culturally, the war exposed the dangers of rigid hierarchy and unquestioned authority. Yamamoto's repeated warnings went unheeded, dismissed as pessimism or Americanized thinking. Japanese society, steeped in tradition and reverence for authority, struggled to reconcile dissenting voices with national pride. The tragic irony was that the nation's most capable strategist, armed with knowledge, experience, and foresight, was sidelined by those unwilling to confront inconvenient truths. This lesson transcends time and borders. In any organization or nation, ignoring informed dissent risks catastrophe. The human dimension of Yamamoto's story is equally compelling. He was not merely a strategist, he was a man burdened by the knowledge of inevitable defeat. His diaries and letters reveal a deeply empathetic mind, a man who understood the cost of war on soldiers and civilians alike. Unlike many contemporaries, he did not romanticize combat. He recognized the fragility of human life in the face of mechanized, industrialized destruction. This perspective made his tactical brilliance all the more poignant. It was not fueled by ambition, but by the desire to minimize suffering within the constraints of an unwinnable situation. The war also revealed the global consequences of industrialized conflict. American mass production, combined with resource abundance, transformed the Pacific theater into a logistical contest that Japan could never hope to match. Strategic decisions were no longer made solely in war rooms. They were dictated by the capacity of steel mills, shipyards, and oil fields thousands of miles away. The atomic bomb, the ultimate product of industrial and scientific prowess, underscored the lethal potential of this new era. Yamamoto had warned about America's technological advantage long before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombs were merely the final, undeniable proof. Even today, military academies worldwide teach the Yamamoto lesson. Understanding your enemy's full capabilities, industrial, technological, and psychological, is as critical as battlefield maneuvers. War is a contest not just of weapons, but of resources, infrastructure, and foresight. Yamamoto's prescience offers a stark reminder. In modern conflict, mathematics often defeats courage, and preparation outweighs audacity. His story remains an enduring study in moral courage, foresight, and tragic inevitability. He was a man who saw the future, attempted to warn his nation, and yet was bound by duty to a course he knew was doomed. In this, he embodies the paradox of war. Knowledge without power to act is both a gift and a curse. History judges Yamamoto not as a victor or a failure, but as a prophet of modern warfare, a man who understood the forces shaping the outcome before anyone else dared to look. By 1943, the tide of the Pacific War had decisively shifted. Yamamoto, aware of Japan's dwindling options, continued to plan operations with precision, knowing each decision could be his last. His intellect remained sharp, his strategic vision clear, but the net of fate was closing around him. The Americans, having broken Japanese codes, had learned of his travel plans. In a chilling twist of irony, the very foresight and daring that had made him a formidable opponent now made him a target. On April 18, 1943, Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour over the Solomon Islands would end abruptly. Flying in his Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, accompanied by a small escort, he remained unaware that American intelligence had intercepted his itinerary. Over Bougainville, P-38 Lightning fighters, guided by precise navigation, descended upon his formation. The attack was swift, leaving no room for maneuver or escape. Yamamoto's aircraft was shot down. The admiral, the strategist, the prophet of modern war was dead. The news reverberated across Japan. Soldiers mourned the loss of a leader who combined intellect with humanity. Civilians, largely shielded from the war's daily horrors, felt a symbolic void, the absence of a man who had once been the guiding mind of the Navy, whose warnings had gone unheeded. Yet, strategically, Yamamoto's death did not change the trajectory of the war. Japan's decline was already set in motion. The loss was personal and symbolic, a reminder of the human cost and unpredictability of modern warfare. Allies and enemies alike recognized the significance. For Americans, the operation symbolized the triumph of intelligence and planning over brute force, a vindication of the painstaking efforts to break codes and understand the enemy. For Japan, it was both a blow to morale and a stark lesson in vulnerability. Even the most brilliant leaders could fall victim to the very mechanisms they helped to create. Yamamoto's death also crystallized the paradox of his life. He had foreseen Japan's eventual defeat, yet he remained bound by duty to serve. He had understood the limitations of courage against industrial might, yet he faced overwhelming odds with resolve. His final flight was emblematic of this duality, a brilliant mind extinguished not in the heat of a hopeless battle, but by the cold calculus of intelligence, a reminder that in modern warfare, knowledge can be as lethal as any weapon. Even today, historians reflect on Yamamoto's final moments with a mixture of awe and melancholy. His life and death underscore the human dimension of strategic conflict. Foresight and intellect cannot shield one from fate, but they can leave an enduring legacy. Yamamoto remains immortalized not as a conqueror or a casualty, but as a man who saw the currents of history with unparalleled clarity and who paid the ultimate price for that vision. After the war, Yamamoto's legacy remained complex and deeply instructive. In Japan, he was remembered not as a symbol of unyielding militarism, but as a strategist with profound insight into the perils his nation faced. Scholars and military analysts studied his writings and decisions, noting a recurring theme: the tension between honor, duty, and pragmatic foresight. Yamamoto had understood that Japan's ambitions often exceeded its capacities, yet he acted with diligence, loyalty, and a sense of responsibility. Internationally, historians saw in Yamamoto a man ahead of his time. His emphasis on air power, logistics, and intelligence foreshadowed modern doctrines of warfare. His death illustrated a stark truth. In the age of rapid communication, code-breaking, and aerial dominance, even the most brilliant commanders were vulnerable. Yamamoto became a case study in the delicate interplay of intellect, strategy, and chance. Beyond strategy, Yamamoto's story resonated as a human lesson. Courage and insight do not guarantee survival. Vision does not immunize one from fate. Yet the impact of a thoughtful, disciplined mind can ripple far beyond a single life. Students of history, both military and civilian, found in Yamamoto's life a cautionary tale about ambition, ethics, and the cost of ignoring inconvenient truths. In museums, books, and memorials, his image is preserved. The calm, composed admiral whose calculations once dictated the course of the Pacific War. Letters and diaries reveal glimpses of the man behind the uniform, concerned for his sailors, contemplative about his country's path, and aware of the human consequences of every order he gave. Ultimately, Yamamoto's story is not merely a chronicle of battles and victories or defeats. It is a meditation on leadership in the modern age, how knowledge, foresight, and duty intersect with unpredictability and mortality. For those who study him, the lesson is clear. War is not only fought with weapons, but with the mind, the heart, and, inevitably, with the acceptance that even brilliance cannot escape the tides of history.